this climatic event here next Sabbath. We thank you for these things in Jesus' name. Amen. The theme of this presentation, I guess, is probably that we need to hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto the end. And the beginning of the confidence for Adventism corporately was the foundational time period, the Millerite time period. And they rejected that foundational experience beginning in 1863. And when the Lord was establishing this movement, he had to take us back to the old past to even understand what the foundations were and what the platform was. And so I want to remind some of us that may have heard it before, some of us may not know, some of the steps along the way that took place. For instance, in 1996, we published this magazine, Time of the End magazine, and there's never been a better presentation of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 that's ever been written in human history, period. This was ordained by the Lord. This is the clearest presentation of those verses. It connects perfectly with the book of Revelation. It is the message of the hour. And when it came into history, there was now that I look back at it, the Lord was in control of how it came into history. It came into history in a branch of Adventism that's called self-supporting work. Sister White makes a distinction between what she calls the regular lines. So the definition of regular lines in the writings of Ellen White is conference employment. If you're a conference worker, you're working in regular lines. But she uses irregular lines, and irregular lines is self-supporting work, and she endorses irregular lines just as sacredly as she endorses regular lines. Both are worthy. And this message came into self-supporting work, Hope International, the irregular lines. And when it did, in the ministry where it got introduced, where I went to work, there was a warfare over every prophetic premise in this magazine. It took a year to get this magazine, 1 chapter at a time, published in a monthly periodical over a year's period of time. And before each monthly publication, we would have an editorial committee where everyone in that room was saying why I was wrong about what I was writing in that particular article, and we would battle for several hours, sometimes into the late night, where the wives that were at home were frustrated that their husbands were spending that many hours arguing over these things. But this message always prevailed. Okay, so this, if you weren't there, you don't understand the struggle that this was, getting it put 1 chapter at a time into the record. And then in 1996, we took all the chapters and we put them into one publication. Where I'm heading to is there was an argument that was a big argument for a long time, and it's over verse 41, the glorious land. And when I began to have opportunity to teach this message publicly, it was in the environment of self-supporting work. I would get invited to camp meetings that were put on by self-supporting ministries. I wasn't getting invited to camp meetings that were put on by conference. I've only been invited to one that I can think of, a conference camp meeting ever, maybe more than one, but just one that I'm positive about. Every other camp meeting I was ever invited to was in self-supporting work. And there was really only one guy in self-supporting ministry that was sympathetic to what I was teaching, and he happened to be the leader at the ministry where I was at. His name was Ron Spear. For whatever reason, he read what I wrote about the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, and he agreed with it, and he had a lot of sway in that time period. So even though all the other ministries that his ministry worked with didn't want anything to do with the message that I was teaching, Ron Spear liked it, and he pushed me out into that public arena. But it didn't change the fact that most of the people that I was in camp meetings with were they'd stab me in the back anytime they had opportunity to. And I literally mean that. Not literally, not with a knife, but I mean, they were really, a friend of mine that worked with us and ran the video department one time, recorded a private meeting that a bunch of them had. He just happened to leave a camera on while they were having a private meeting. You would not believe the things that were said about me by men that would go out on the camp meeting circuit and preach alongside of me. Okay, it was just incredible. And there was one guy that actually made a vendetta that he was going to bring our ministry down. And for a few years, man, every time you heard about this brother, he was attacking what I taught. There was another ministry that actually had a camp meeting, and the whole camp meeting was, every speaker was given an assignment to prove why Jeff Pippenger was a heretic. Okay, that's the kind of controversy that was going on in that history. But this one guy that had a vendetta, he was always taking me to task for what I believed about the glorious land. Okay, because almost all of those people believe the glorious land is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I was saying, no, this is the United States of America. That was a battle. It was a big battle. I have a reason for playing this subject up. Because it was the Lord's providence. Okay, so, you know, I remember this one guy, the same guy, I'm going to speak about him without naming his name for a while. I can remember one time he says, something like, he was going around in his camp meeting circuit saying, oh, Pippinger's, how crazy is this? Pippinger's saying that verse 40 begins in 1798 and it ends in verse 41, the Sunday law. How crazy is it to say that there's a verse that has history from 1798 to the Sunday law? And so when I heard he was saying that, what I did in the next camp meetings was I said, well, I thought that guy was an Adventist. And the way I understand it, Revelation 13:11 talks about a beast that comes up out of the earth and that's the United States. And it arrives in verse 11 in 1798. And that verse goes all the way till it speaks like a dragon, which is the Sunday law. It has the same identical history in verse 11 of Revelation 13 as I'm saying is in verse 40. But I'm a heretic for saying that. And he backed down off of that. A lot of crazy things that he was charging me with. He was saying, you know, that's Jesuit teaching, what Pippinger's doing. The Jesuits are the ones that take the symbols and make them literal, and he's taken the glorious land, and instead of applying it spiritually, he's saying it's literally the United States. And once again, I said, well, I thought in Revelation 13:11, that lamb-like beast, which is a symbol, was a symbol, but we apply it to literally the United States. And he backed down on that one, okay? I haven't thought about these stupid arguments for a long time, but that's what was going on. Okay, so here, the glorious land, I actually still have a sermon. It's called The Glorious Argument. That's the title I put on it. And I have 18 points, strong points that show, each one of them alone is enough. 18 different points that show that the glorious land is the United States. But the knockout punch, okay, in this history, this is this history here, the knockout punch for me was that it finally clicked on me that the history of pagan Rome combined with the history of papal Rome identifies the history of modern Rome. And in Daniel, the book of Daniel, when pagan Rome takes control of the world, in Daniel 8 verse 9, it has to conquer 3 geographical areas: the east, the south, the pleasant land. That's pagan Rome. And then when papal Rome took control of the world, it had to overcome 3 horns, which are 3 geographical areas: the Heruli, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. When pagan Rome conquered its 3rd geographical area, it's going to rule the world supremely for 360 years. When papal Rome conquered the 3rd obstacle, the Goths, in 538, it rules the world supremely for 1260 years. So the argument that came to light because of the argument of the glorious land was, if it took 3 geographical areas to be conquered by pagan Rome before pagan Rome took control of the world, and papal Rome had to conquer 3 geographical areas before it took control of the world, then modern Rome has to take control of 3 geographical areas before it rules the world again. And those 3 geographical areas are Daniel 11 verse 40, the south; verse 41, the glorious land; and verse 42, Egypt. Therefore, verse 41 has to be a geographical area. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church is not a geographical area. It's a spiritual entity. End of story. When you see that, you quit arguing about who's the glorious land. You know it's the United States. It has to be a geographical area. But why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that for this reason. In this movement, many times we'll say that those of us that are in this movement, we have to use William Miller's 14 rules of prophetic interpretation. And we kind of leave it there. Even though we've all in this movement come to understand that this is the Millerite movement, and William Miller, he's going to be formalized, his message is going to be formalized in 1831, and this is our movement, and our message is formalized in 1996. We know this parallel and many more parts to it, but we point to Miller and say we need to use his 14 rules of prophetic interpretation. We need to use William Miller's methodology, and we do. But what we sometimes leave out, but what we've taught repeatedly, is just as the Lord gave William Miller certain rules of prophetic interpretation for the prophetic message of his history, he also gave this movement specific rules of prophetic interpretation. And how he did it, one of them I'm telling you. Through a controversy over the glorious land, the push and shove of trying to answer that controversial argument led to the conclusion of 3 Romes. Pagan Rome plus papal Rome identifies modern Rome. Pardon me? Triple application of prophecy is a rule that this movement uses. But we use it, the way the Lord brought that to light was over this argument about the glorious land of verse 41. And now, that triple application of prophecy, how do we use it? Why is it important? Okay, later on, this is in this history, we learned this triple application of prophecy to defend the message of 1996, the message that's formalized in the Time of the End magazine. But then we get to 9/11. Do you know what in my opinion, the strongest argument about the third woe arriving at 9/11 is? It's a triple application of prophecy. When you take the characteristics of the first woe in Revelation 9 and combine them with the characteristics of the second woe in Revelation 9, you identify the characteristics of the third woe that came at 9/11. That triple application of prophecy is what put in place the fact that our understanding of Islam was airtight. And what I want you to see here, don't see me in what I'm saying. What I'm wanting you to see is in the argument back here in this history, the argument of the glorious land, the Lord brought to light a rule of prophetic interpretation that we were going to need to recognize Islam at 9/11. Okay? That's not all. That's not all. What's another triple application of prophecy? Elijah is another triple application of prophecy, but that's not the one I'm looking for. Thank you, my brother. Keep trying.
Threefold union.
Threefold union I'm not looking for either. Babylon. Good for you. Okay, why do we need to know about Babylon? I'll tell you this. The triple application of prophecy, of the several various triple applications of prophecy that we've recognized, Elijah, Rome, Babylon, Islam, I think the most significant one is Babylon. Why is that? The reason I think this is so is that the message of this history, right in here, the midnight cry, what was the midnight cry? Be technical. The midnight cry was the empowerment of what? The second angel's message. And what's the second angel's message? Babylon is fallen, is fallen. And that message gets repeated right here. Right? When the angel of Revelation 18 comes down, he repeats, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. So the message of the hour, the message of the midnight cry in the Millerite history And the message that lightens the earth with the glory is Babylon is fallen, is fallen. And my argument is that the reason that the second angel's message says is fallen is it's identifying a triple application of prophecy. It's saying if you're going to understand this message, you must understand a triple application of prophecy. In order to understand the fall of Babylon at the end of the world, you must understand the first time Babylon fell in the story of Nimrod, followed by the second time Babylon fell in the story of Belshazzar, in order to understand the third and final fall of Babylon right here at 9/11. Okay, so what is it about? Well, go to Genesis 11. You see this, the three-step testing process pretty clearly in Genesis 11, verse 2, 4, and where's the third expression of 7? Okay. Go to, let us make brick, verse 3. Verse 4, and they said, go to, let us build a city. And verse 7 says, go to. You got 3 go-tos. First, second, third angel's message. Okay, in verse 3, they're going to make brick. And it's a counterfeit for the covenant. Okay, they're going to use slime and mortar. And when the Lord makes a covenant with his people, he says, you mark the covenant with a pillar of stone, and you don't use any handmade utensils for those stones. You pile them up. You don't use any brick and mortar. And Nimrod here is doing a counterfeit covenant. First angel's message, covenant being marked. This is the counterfeit, go to. The second go to in verse 4 says, let us build a city and a tower. What's a city? A city is a state. What's a tower? A church. Church and state. Second message. Combination of church and state. Image of the beast. And in verse 2, they're going to make themselves a name. Okay, this is their character. But when they get to verse 7, the third message, this is where the door closes, right? Let us go down and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. This is judgment, is it not? Okay, so the judgment in the story of Nimrod's Babel is in verse 8, and says, so the Lord scattered them. Okay, Nimrod, I'm going to keep this simple. The judgment is that they were scattered. Belshazzar. What was his judgment? Many tekel upharsin. Turn that into a expression of math. 2520. Or a 126. Or a 151. Let's not get off track here. What I'm wanting to show you this is, at 9/11, an angel comes down out of heaven, the earth is lightened with his glory, and he repeats the second angel's message, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. Babylon's fallen in the time of Nimrod, Babylon is fallen in the time of Belshazzar. And the judgment, what is meted out to Nimrod and Belshazzar is what? It's the judgment of the 2520. Is it not? So what do you expect right here? Judgment of the 2520. Who's going to get judged there? Who gets judged? Adventists. This is Adventism. Where does Belshazzar's judgment get placed? Pardon me? It's with the handwriting on the wall. The handwriting on the wall comes into this history with these 2 tables. And Adventism rejects these 2 tables as surely as Belshazzar has rejected the warning message given to him by Nebuchadnezzar. Sister White says he rejected the warning message of Nebuchadnezzar, who typified him. And what was Nebuchadnezzar's warning message? It was the 2520. Who's rejecting the 2520 in this history? Adventism. Who's Nimrod typify? How many dreams, not Nimrod, I'm sorry, who's Nebuchadnezzar typify? William Miller. How many dreams does Nebuchadnezzar have? How many dreams did William Miller have? What was Nebuchadnezzar's second dream about? The 2520. What was William Miller's second dream about? The 2520. And Sister White says Nebuchadnezzar typifies Belshazzar. Nebuchadnezzar is the beginning of Adventism, typifying the judgment of Belshazzar down here at the end. And I left one thing out earlier today when I was talking about Miller. Probably, so maybe we can tie this together. The King James Version takes 7 years to produce. It's produced in 1611. 220 years later, William Miller's raised up to formalize his message, but to rightly divide the King James Version. What's the first time prophecy that William Miller discovers? The 7 times. The 2520. 7 years at the beginning, 7 times at the end. Right? This here, this is the end of Adventism that is being judged here. Why are they being judged here? What happens at 9/11? They refuse to return to the old past that they had forgotten, that they'd set aside in 1863, their foundation, the beginning of their confidence. Okay, so what am I doing here? What I'm doing here, brothers and sisters, there's no way a human being cooks up a triple application of prophecy. In fact, there's no way a human being even recognizes a triple application of prophecy. The only reason a human being recognizes a triple application of prophecy is because the Lord orchestrates His providential leading that forces the dumb human being to grapple with things that he's incapable of understanding until he does recognize them. No credit for human beings, but the Lord produces a triple application of prophecy in this history because He knows He wants us to understand it here in this history with Islam, because you got to see Islam. You've got to understand Islam. You follow me? Amen. So when we get to this history, now we're grappling with the 2520. You know, I used to tell this story. I never had, when I would tell this story, and there was really no, it was just kind of filler. It was true and it was interesting, but it really had no import, I guess is the way you would say it. But I'm going to tell this story. Again, it's got import this time. I'm changing subjects a little bit here now. I'm moving away from the idea, I hope you saw it, that it's from the understanding of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 that a controversy was raised over what the glorious land was, and that controversy, among other things, revealed a triple application of prophecy, which, among other things, put our understanding of Islam in concrete. Okay? And the triple application of prophecy upholds a lot of other truths. Okay, but there was a time before this history, in between 1989, we went to Hope in 1994. In this history here, I mean, I'm like every other young married man. I was young back then. I'd go ahead and tag along to a shopping mall with my wife, but you know, I'd sit on the benches outside in the... I'm no fun, she just said. I was at a shopping mall. But there came a point in time where I didn't mind going to the shopping malls, and the reason for it is I had heard some studies by a guy named Leslie Harding. He's deceased now, I'm sure. He was a theologian, teacher in Adventism. Good guy. Had some false prophetic concept, but good guy. And he taught us a truth about Adventism that I latched onto, but I took it further than he did. And his truth was that, and maybe others taught it too, maybe he got it from someone else, he may not have been the originator, that there's always a prophet raised up at the beginning of a time prophecy, and then at the end of a time prophecy, there's a prophet that's raised up, and you'd call the one that pronounced the time prophecy the proclaiming prophet, because he proclaimed it. And when it was time for that prophecy to be fulfilled, no matter what it was, that prophet was called a gathering prophet. And the reason it was called a gathering prophet is that prophet that's raised up at the end of a time prophecy, there's always a group of people that gather around that prophet, accept that prophet's message as present truth. And that's about as far as he took it, I think. Where I took it was as I realized that, well, Noah was one of those gathering prophets. Moses was one of those gathering prophets. John the Baptist was one of the gathering prophets. There's several of them that are gathering prophets. And when you put them all together, you can show that when a gathering prophet, a prophet's raised up at the end of a time prophecy, as Ellen White was raised up in 1844, she's a gathering prophet, that her message is life or death. You couldn't reject Noah's message and live. You couldn't reject Moses' message and live. In early writings, page 259 says those that rejected the teachings of John the Baptist could not be benefited by the teaching of Jesus. If you can't be benefited by the teachings of Jesus, you're dead. Those three are all gathering prophets. So my conclusion was, Adventism has to accept what Ellen White says. It's life or death. Okay, Adventism never liked to hear that. I taught that message for a long time, but before I had opportunity to teach it back in this history, before I'm even at this self-supporting ministry, I knew something else. I realized that these proclaiming prophets and these gathering prophets, that their names always corresponded with their ministry. And I had it figured out. Ellen Goldwhite, she was the prophetess to the Laodicean church, because I knew I could prove Ellen what meant a bright and shining light. Okay, that's the spiritual eye salve that the Laodiceans need. And the Laodiceans need the white raiment. That's white. They also need the gold that's tried in the fire, but her middle name wasn't Gold, it was Gould. So before I could actually stand in public and say that Gould meant gold, I had to find a dictionary that would uphold that. So I would go to the shopping mall with my wife, and I'd go into the baby stores and look at the baby names book, looking for Gould, looking for Gould. I never could find it. I never could prove it. And then in 1994, we went to work at this self-supporting ministry up by Seattle. And right after we got up there, we went into the city of Seattle, and we come up over a little rise, and there's the Seattle Library. And I says to her, I'll bet that they got a dictionary in there. And sure enough, we went in this big library. It's probably empty now. They've probably taken all the books out and burned them, okay? But we went in there, and they actually have these people that are walking around helping you. And as we walk in this big library, I said, do you have a book that is a dictionary for names? He says, oh, sure, come on over here. We've got several of them. And right here's the biggest one. And there's a book about this thick of a dictionary of names. And he says, he opened it, he lifted it up and opened it as he was walking past it. Take your time. And he opened it right up to the place where Gould is as he's walking by. Gould is the old English way to say gold. So I knew, that's all I needed. I already knew it. I was searching just so I could stand in front of people and say positively, you reject Ellen White, you're a dead man. Okay, so I had a problem that I guess I'd created for myself, if you want to look at it that way, but it was from prophecy. I realized that at the end of this time prophecy, this 2,300-year prophecy, that the Lord had raised up a gathering prophet, and her message was life or death. Okay, so now if you go to your notes, I seen some, we used to sell a book, maybe we still sell the book, I don't know, about the Millerite history. Best book, one of the best books on Millerite history we have ever seen. It was used as a college course up at Andrews. And the son-in-law of the guy that wrote it, he's been a critic of ours for years. Strong public critic. Easy to show why he's in error. I give him no credit for being smart about anything. He's the one that's in error, deep, dark error. But recently he's been out in the public arena going after us again since July 18th message. And he even referenced this in his recent response, this passage from Early Writings 74. On page 4 of your notes, on the third quote from the bottom, Early Writings, page 74, it says, I've seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, and that his hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures so that none could see it until his hand was removed. Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom and does not belong to the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. I have a problem now. What's my problem? My problem is that I'm convicted that I have to accept Ellen White simply as she writes it, okay? So in here I see this chart is directed by the hand of the Lord and should not be altered. And I see that the pioneers of Adventism, they had the correct view of the daily. And I understand the Adventist Church has the incorrect view of the daily, because William Miller and the Millerites, they argued with apostate Protestantism that had the wrong view of the daily. Apostate Protestantism taught the daily was Christ's sanctuary ministry, and the Millerites said, no, the daily is paganism. This is from pioneer history, an argument. And so when Sister White says, I was shown that those that gave the judgment hour cry had the correct view of the daily, I'm in a box now. I can't just get on board with Adventism. I have to accept the premise that this chart was directed by the hand of the Lord and shouldn't be altered, and that the daily in the book of Daniel represents paganism. So I've recently seen this once again come up about our flawed view of prophecy, and I thought at this point in time I want to remind you of something, because when we used to deal with the history of 1840 to 1844, we would use this quote, but I want to remind you of the other quotes. Sister Karen mentioned one this morning. So it was like, I thought, wow, that's the Lord's providence. Notice this next quote. God is not giving us a new message. We are to proclaim the message that in 1843 and 1844 brought us out of the other churches. What message is that? It's that message right there on this chart. We don't have a new message. If you're going to accept Ellen White at her word, and I think you should, because she's a gathering prophet and her message is life or death. Notice the next quote. God bids us give our time and strength to the work of preaching to the people the messages that stirred the men and women in 1843 and 1844. He didn't tell us to give our time and strength to use all these apostate Protestantism evangelical techniques to try to bring people into the church. He says, give our power and strength into repeating the message on this chart right here. That's how I read it. That was the problem I had from the study about gathering prophets. But before we go any further, let me remind you of something here. Maybe we didn't understand back then. I didn't understand back then. I knew that this was the end of a time prophecy. And what I used to teach, I couldn't quite understand. I didn't think William Miller was a prophet. The way I would express it, I say, in a time prophecy that deals with God's people, when it concludes, the Lord always raises up a gathering prophet. But now I understand it's when a time prophecy is fulfilled, the Lord's going to raise up a gathering prophet. And in 1798, there was a prophet raised up. Adventism doesn't like to hear it. Who's the prophet that's raised up at the end of this time prophecy? And this message becomes present truth for a group of people that rally around him. And if you reject the first angel's message, what happens to you? You're lost. Miller's raised up right here. Okay, so this here for us would be 1989. And this here, let's just keep this simple. This is where the door closes. I'm not going to go very far with this. I got to get back to my notes. You know, the door closed here on October 22nd. And then when does Ellen White have her vision? December. October 22nd is almost November, so in less than 2 months, Ellen White has her first vision. A gathering prophet is raised up. Do we think the door closes on July 18th?
Yes.
Do we?
Yes.
So what's going to happen right here?
Spirit of prophecy is going to be restored.
Spirit of prophecy is going to be restored, brothers and sisters. And the message that is put out at this point is life or death. You follow me? Okay, back. Going back to the argument about Millerite history on page 5. All the messages given from 1840 to 44 are to be made forcible now. For there are many people who have lost their bearings. The messages are to go to all the churches. Christ said, "Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For verily I say unto you, that many prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which you see, and have not seen them, and hear those things which you hear, and have not heard them. Blessed are the eyes which saw the things that were seen in 1843 and 1844. What was seen in 1843 and 1844? The midnight cry. The midnight cry. What are we seeing now? The midnight cry. Who wanted to be here with us?
All of them.
The prophets and the righteous men have desired to look in to the message of July 18th. The message was given. Now she's talking about the midnight cry in the Millerite history. The message was given, and there should be no delay in repeating the message. For the signs of the times are fulfilling. The closing work must be done. A great work will be done in a short time. A message will soon be given by God's appointment that will swell into a loud cry. Then Daniel will stand in his lot and give his testimony. What's Daniel's testimony? This is the test question for today. What's Daniel's testimony? This is Daniel's testimony, brothers and sisters. For this history, this is Daniel's testimony. And the heart of this is the Sunday law crisis, the image of the beast, the restoration of the papal wound. Exactly what we're predicting begins on July 18th. That's when Daniel stands in his lot and gives his testimony. The truths that we received in 1841, 42, 43, and 44 are now to be studied and proclaimed. The message of the first, second, and third angels will be in the future be proclaimed with a loud voice. They will be given with earnest determination and in the power of the Spirit. The first, second, and third angels' message are the loud cry, and it was proclaimed in 1841, 42, 43, and 44. The warning has come. Nothing is to be allowed to come in that will disturb the foundation of the faith upon which we've been building ever since the message came in 1842, 1843, 1844. I was in this message, and ever since I've been standing before the world, true to the light that God has given us. We do not propose to take our feet off the platform on which we were placed, as day by day we sought the Lord with earnest prayer, seeking for light. Do you think I could give up the light that God has given me? It is to be as the rock of ages, capital R, capital A. It has been guiding me ever since it was given. The message that came in 1842, 43, and 44 was the rock of ages that guided Ellen White her entire life.
Amen.
And we are to repeat that message. So it isn't simply that Sister White says in early writings, page 79, that this chart was directed by the hand of the Lord and should not be altered. She's pointing to that entire history and saying this is the history that needs to be repeated. The message of that history needs to be repeated. Those who stand as teachers and leaders in our institutions are to be sound in the faith and the principles of the third angel's message. God wants His people to know that we have the message as He gave it in 1843 and 1844. When did we realize this? Pardon me? When did we realize this? Maybe too obscure question. We didn't realize this back here. 9/11, we begin to realize this barely. We begin to realize it at 9/11. Why? Well, a triple application comes in 9/11 because we've seen Islam, the third woe has arrived in history, and now we got to defend it from prophecy. But where do you start to defend it from prophecy when you've never thought about Islam and Bible prophecy before? With the charts. You got to go back here to the Millerite understanding that the first woe is Islam, the second woe is Islam. And when this chart is corrected in the 1850 chart, the first woe is Islam, the second woe is Islam. Triple application of prophecy. What's the third woe? It's Islam. In order to make that defense, you got to return to the old paths. And you begin to grapple with things like that the very center column in both charts is the 2520. And the very center column in both these sacred charts, the center of the center column is the cross. So the center of it all is the cross, but the line it's in is the line of the 2520. The Lord is leading us back to the old paths here. In order to uphold Islam, He's given us a triple application of prophecy, but we got to come back here. But you got to remember, those people don't give up. They're still out there on the horizon saying, hey, Jeff Pippenger, a heretic. What he says about the glorious land is error, it's error. And so I get a phone call from a guy in 2006, and he says, you know what? I found some pioneer articles where this one pioneer, he says that the glorious land is the United States. Do you get it? After all these years, this is in 2006, 10 years at least, more than 10 years. First self-supporting work, then conference work. Before 9/11, the General Conference is already identifying me as a heretic, before 9/11, okay? And one of the things they're saying is, what he's saying about the glorious land is incorrect. We actually had a meeting where it was, I would present for a while, and then this theologian that worked at the General Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church would present what he thought about the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, and I would, and then he would. It went on and on. I think, here's a guy that wants to claim that the glorious land of verse 41 is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He's teaching, if that's true, he's teaching there comes a point in time in human history where the Roman Catholic Church, the King of the North, comes in and conquers the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Thinking, it's a crazy teaching, but why would you teach that if you're a Seventh-day Adventist? But that's what they're teaching, and it goes on and on. So when you finally, pardon me? Well, now you're going to get on that side of the story. That's the other side of the story, but I won't go there. You get to the point in time where someone discovers, hey, there's a pioneer that taught that the glorious land of Daniel 11 verse 41 is the United States of America. So we jumped on that article. It wasn't just a pioneer. What pioneer was it? Hiram Edson. Okay, who's Hiram Edson? Well, he's the champion of the 2520 in 1856. They're not going to listen to him. Ellen White named her son after him. After the passing of time, the next day, what happens with him?
He gets the vision in the cornfield.
And what does he see happen? Christ moved from the holy to the most holy place. This is a first-class, high-credentialed pioneer, and he's saying that the glorious land is the United States. But you know what else he's saying? He's saying Miller was wrong on the 2520. He should have put the 2520 against the northern kingdom, not the southern kingdom. And here I am, personally, in 2006. I've been traveling since back here, around the world, teaching prophecy. And when I traveled to South America, I actually had these 2 charts translated into Spanish. That's the kind of work that we did with these charts before 2006. The reason for it is I wanted to teach that the Millerites believed the daily was paganism. It's kind of vague here on the 43 chart. It says take away taking away of the daily sacrifice, Daniel 12, 11, and 12. But on the 1850 chart, where the corrections are made, it says pagan dominion or daily taken away. So it identifies the daily as paganism in black and white. That's what I want to teach. I've been traveling all this history here and never noticed that both of these charts have this time prophecy on them. 2520, what's that? Start reading Hiram Edson's articles. And he's saying, well, Miller should have selected the one against the northern kingdom, not the southern kingdom. I haven't even heard of him before. The following Sabbath, I'm in a church. I run out of things to say. I tell him, hey, you know, I came across an interesting series of articles by Hiram Edson, and for the first time in human history, both 2520s were put on a board, one underneath another. Okay? Shortly after that, we were in Blythe, California. There's a guy that gave a testimony, the very first testimony that was given this morning in church. He's in the audience in Blythe, California. We're doing this study that began just as a lark because I ran out of time, that the Northern Kingdom's 2520 began in 723, ended in 1798. The Southern Kingdom's 2520 began in 677. Ended in 1844. And this guy is kind of verbal, if that's the right way to say it. The guy that gave the testimony this morning, he's in the audience in Blythe. He says, hey, Brother Pippenger, did you ever notice that there was 46 years between 1798 and 1844? No, that's kind of cool. And suddenly, all the 46s jump out of the woodwork. That the Jews tell Christ this temple was 46 years in the building, that Moses takes 46 days to receive instructions on building the temple, on and on and on. The beginning of the confidence of this message, it has human beings involved, but there's no way that it's human beings that have done this. Every step of the way, you can see divine fingerprints or footprints on it everywhere you look. And it's hard for me to believe that Christ is someone that's going to start something and not finish it. Particularly when you look at the environment on planet Earth today. You know, the July 18th prediction that we have out there, pretty bizarre, pretty off the wall, whatever you want to label it. But what isn't? What isn't that's going on planet Earth today? The idolatry of movies, shut down. The idolatry of sports, shut down. The idolatry of education, shut down. The hero that was going to lead the United States out of its economic demise has just been forced into spending more trillions of dollars than anybody else ever to try to pull them out of this pandemic crisis. Testimonies 9/11, struggling in vain to put business operations on a more secure basis. On and on and on. So the July 18th prediction is just one of several little things that are out there. And the places where Sister White says that the whole world can tell that something great and decisive is about to take place. Okay, so my point is on all this is, if it isn't this message, if it isn't this movement, where is the message and the movement that stands upon the beginning of the confidence of Adventism, that stands on the foundations of Adventism, and that parallels the history of the Millerite movement? That's where we're at. That's what I'm locked into. Where's the other one out there that does so?
But you could go along with all the things you've laid out and say yes, 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 like everything you say I've seen, I say yes, 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 and we could have still been that beginning and made a mistake. That's
I don't know what you're talking about. Be
You
more
can
clear.
hold to the beginning of your confidence and get down to 2019, and in 2019, and it's not necessarily rejecting the beginning of your confidence to have made a mistake.
All right. Is,
I don't know.
is anyone else not following her logic?
I'm following your logic.
Okay, can you express it more clearly than she?
So she's saying you could have been right for the entire time and then made a boo-boo, one boo-boo, which is the...
Yes, you could have. Is that what you're saying? You could have been right at the entire time and then made a
You
boo-boo?
don't have to give up all the way up. You don't have to give up the 46, the 25, 20, all the growth we've done to find out that in 2019 we got off track with something.
Okay,
Or 2020.
now you're saying a little bit different. I want to address her thought first.
You were just trying to say what
Yeah,
how I understood.
Okay, I'm
what
going
she
to do
was
with
saying.
your boo-boo first, all right? 2019, we make a mistake. If you think that's possible, you miss the whole point. This here was not Jeff Pippenger. It wasn't the people associated with Jeff Pippenger. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Jeff Pippenger didn't purposely publish these two articles in 1996 so that 10 years later he can identify that the message was formalized here and that it lines up with when Miller formalized his message 220 years after both these starting points. I didn't do that. I ain't that smart. Okay, all the way through, these things that have been happening have not been human. So when we get to 2019 to suddenly say the human made a mistake, I'm saying as the human that was involved from right here, I made mistakes all the way through. I've made mistakes all the way through. It's never been about my mistakes. It's been about what the Lord has put in place. Okay, but we're evaluating the humanity here, and that's right. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. But if you think that's what I'm sharing here today, you're missing it. What I'm trying to convey is that Jesus is the one that's been walking this history step by step through, and he's been using the flawed human instruments all the way through. Now, what was it you were saying?
So if you're holding the Lord accountable for leading us out this far, and now we've got the Egyptian army behind us and we're faced with the Red Sea, if you're holding him accountable in the same way, you've set yourself up for such an epic crisis on the 19th if it doesn't happen.
You mean a big disappointment?
You may not be able to recover because you're blaming God for everything that's come before.
There was a quote that I started with, and it speaks to the dilemma that I think you might be addressing. It's the very first quote on page 1. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept, both the wise and the foolish virgins. By the tarrying of the bridegroom is represented the passing of time when the Lord was expected, the disappointment and the seeming delay. In this time of uncertainty, the interest of the superficial and half-hearted soon began to waver, and their efforts to relax. But those whose faith was based on a personal knowledge of the Bible had a rock beneath their feet, which the waves of disappointment could not wash away. They all slumbered and slept, one class in unconcern and abandonment of their faith, the other class patiently waiting till clearer light should be given. Yet in the night of trial, the latter seemed to lose, to some extent, their zeal and devotion. Who's the latter? Who's the latter?
The half-hearted one.
No. The latter is the ones that are on the right side of the issue, saying that even they began to lose their zeal. Okay, the latter, to some extent, their zeal and devotion. The half-hearted and superficial could no longer lean upon the faith of their brethren. Each must stand or fall for himself. The reason I'm doing this presentation, one of the reasons, my human logic is you got, I guess, 7 days, if we're going to address your thought to July 19th. You got 7 days to look at this history and ask yourself if it was human or if it was divine. If it was divine, You need to grapple with that, internalize it to the extent that even if nothing happens on July 18th, you know that based upon what you've seen since 1989 to July 18th, that the Lord has a purpose that He's going to fulfill, and He will fulfill it. That's where we have to be. That is, what is that in terms of the sermon today?
To the beginning, but you have to temper the false prophets.
That's correct, but that's not what I'm getting at. In the beginning of the sermon today, the day of provocation is what I'm getting to. The day of provocation, you have 10 that are wavering, and they want to go back to Egypt. They actually select a captain to go back to Egypt. Only Joshua and Caleb have the faith, and that story is used to say that we must we must labor to enter into that rest. And Sister White, the quote's in there on page 1, that rest is the rest of grace. So define what the rest of grace, I mean, that's kind of an obscure expression. What does the rest of grace mean to you? Perhaps latter rain. To me, what it means to me is that I have to trust that the Lord has finished the work, and I'm entering into the rest where He's going to continue to finish the work through His power, through His providential leading, and I'm going to have to trust that He's going to do it in His ways and means.
Not by might, not by
Strength, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord.
That's what it means to have 20/20 vision.
That's what it means to have 20/20 vision. But I'm here to tell you, personally, I get how illogical it is to say that there's going to be a nuclear strike by Islam up on Nashville on July 18th. I get the illogicality of that. Is that a word? All right, I get it. But I'm pretty sure something's got to happen based upon God's leading and based upon the circumstances of planet Earth. If it isn't now, and it isn't this message, and it isn't this movement, then what is it?
I'm going to say it again. I'm only going to read just a different part of the same passage I've been trying to emphasize. We need desperately, right now, to read the first few pages of the 23rd chapter of Great Controversy, What is the Sanctuary? I'll just pull one paragraph out of it, second paragraph of the chapter.
This should be memorized. Go ahead, loud and clear.
But the appointed time had passed, and the Lord had not appeared. This is after the disappointment. The believers knew that God's word could not fail. Their interpretation of the prophecy must be at fault. But where was the mistake? Many rashly cut the knot of difficulty by denying that the 2300 days had ended in 1844. No reason could be given for this except that Christ had not come at the time they expected Him. They argued that if the prophetic days had ended in 1844, Christ would then have returned to cleanse the sanctuary by the purification of the earth by fire, and that since He had not come, the days could not have ended. And then she goes through and explains the 2300-day prophecy and the passage that Toby quoted in part earlier today. So anyway, just need to look at that.
This history here, take it out to 2020. If this is Millerite history going to 1844, at the disappointment here, some rashly cut the knot. By that, what they're saying is they determined this whole history was nonsense.
Exactly.
Okay, the whole history was nonsense. And if you read that passage thoroughly, it's saying what allowed those that entered into the most holy place by faith to stay there and prevail was that even though what they thought was going to happen there didn't happen, they couldn't deny that the Lord had been leading all the way through here. And therefore, He must be leading here. That's what I've been trying to say here. The beginning of our confidence, it's Millerite history, the foundations, but it's this here. It's our history is our foundation too. And He's orchestrated all of this. And if we had time, wouldn't take time, but even the Omega movement was prophesied. It was laid out. It's the Lord announcing this is the final rebellion in this movement. We've seen the final rebellion in this movement. Right before you enter the promised land. Right before you take down Jericho. Scary as that is, I think we got to get prepared to enter the rest of grace, no matter what happens. And unless we really can challenge this history, that this isn't valid, I can't do it. I can't do it because I was there. I watched it happen firsthand. And I know what parts of it were me and what parts of it weren't me.
So again, everybody in this movement should read the first few chapters of the 23rd chapter of Great Controversy.
Everyone in this movement should read the first three paragraphs.
First few pages, let's say.
First 3 pages of the
23rd chapter of Great Controversy before next Sabbath.
And what is the title?
What is the sanctuary?
And what is the chapter?
The 23rd chapter is entitled, What is the Sanctuary?
So the 23rd chapter is the 2300 days that leads to the question, what is the sanctuary?
Yes.
Okay.
Before next Sabbath.
Or before tomorrow.
Yeah.
What else you got to do? All right.
I've got to raise a logical question that will come.
I'm not rebuking or criticizing you. I can do that when no one's around.
The question, I'm fine with the rebuke and criticism. I'm just being honest.
Okay, what's your honesty again? Let's throw it out there one more time.
Is that when you say that and read that and say that when you come to July 18th, 2020, next Sabbath, and nothing happens, you have developed yourself a back door to get out of a prediction that you made. And I think that is a dangerous place to be.
Well, that might be a dangerous place to be if you're developing a back door. But the Millerites, if you read that, did not develop a back door.
I know, that's what I'm afraid of. Like, when we're even discussing it, the back door is visible now.
No, they didn't develop a back door. They did exactly what they were supposed to do, exactly where the Lord led them, and they came to understand exactly what happened. There's people that cut the knot, they threw everything out, and then there was people that made a back door. And
On the 17th they did it. They didn't discuss it on the 17th.
Did discuss what?
Of July, or what's today, the 11th. They weren't discussing on the 11th of the July that there's a possibility of their prediction not happening on the 18th of July.
No, we
No, they
only
didn't.
know that because
they
that's
didn't.
hindsight.
That's a back door.
Well,
No, that isn't a back
it isn't
door.
a back door. It's just
It kind of is.
if we're going to be just like the Millerites, then we know these things in advance. Well, we've talked about this at length. That there is most likely going to be a disappointment.
That's not the point. A back door, Browen, is a way to get out of this prediction. That's not what we're doing. If we're going to follow Millerite history, even if it doesn't happen the way we think, the Millerites did not get out of that prediction. Does the Seventh-day Adventist Church, at least in theory, still present the 2300-year prophecy? Yeah. They didn't set it aside. So would we set aside July 18th? Only if we were going to use some kind of back door.
Do we set aside November 9?
No.
There's another word for back door.
Another word for back door.
Way out.
A long time ago, years ago, when I was a baby Adventist, and I somehow got hold of the article that was put in Eternity magazine by Donald Barnhouse and Walter Martin, and it affected my young Adventist experience to the core. But I had studied Great Controversy enough, Spirit of Prophecy enough, to reject what they were saying. If people are familiar with that history back in 1957, when these evangelical pastors were getting together with Adventist leaders, and Adventist leaders compromised our faith. And Walter Martin and Donald Barnhouse, these evangelicals, were accusing all of Adventism of using the sanctuary doctrine as a scapegoat. Scapegoat is another way for a back door.
A scapegoat to cover their wrong prediction in 1844. And we've seen a scapegoat raised today. You sent it out.
What?
That video that went out today is a scapegoat. That, like he's describing, it's saying that all of Adventism is wacky like this, when in reality there's only one movement that is actually predicting this to the core. So in his Barnhouse story, there's going to be that kind of phenomenon too, where Adventism gets put in a wrong light, bad light, correct light probably, but there's still the truth there. And we're going to be on the side of truth. So I just want to make sure, because we've had a little bit of possible confusion here. What I'm saying is, based upon great controversy, if you come to July 18th and it doesn't happen the way you think, and then you say all of this was foolishness, then you cut the knot. Okay, that's not a back door. Backdoor or scapegoat is where you come up with some other foolish definition of what happened that allows you to carry on and pretend that it was some kind of fulfillment of prophecy, but it really didn't address the issue at hand.
Like the Omega did.
Like the Omega did with their November 9th, okay? Perhaps. I'm saying that any misunderstandings that we have here of July 18th on July 19th, those among us that are on the right side of the issue are going to stand firm in the rest of grace, trusting that the misconceptions that we may hold to are going to be very rapidly clarified by the Lord. I'm saying rapidly because the final movement's a rapid one, and he's in the process of lifting up an ensign. He's very rapidly going to clarify those things for these people, because he's not going to let his name get dragged in the mud. And there is no other entity out there that can fulfill the position of the Protestant horn at this time.
That being lifted up as an ensign could involve the fact that there is not a nuclear attack on July 18th.
I didn't say that, but
no.
If that's how you have to internalize it.
That's what you're saying. You're saying that there could, we can trust, we can have confidence in our past, and I do have confidence in the past, that if something did not happen on July 18th, we can trust in our past history enough to know that it'll be clarified.
No, I don't believe that, but I'll tell you why I don't believe it. In your notes, on page 7 from Isaiah 18:3, all you inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth see ye. There's something that the whole world sees. When he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains. The ensign is going to be a distinct religious movement, okay, above the mountains. When he bloweth a trumpet, hear ye. The ensign gets lifted up by a warning trumpet message. What's a trumpet message? It's a warning about warfare. So I'm holding to that. This is the beginning of the Third World War. This is the beginning of a civil war. This is the beginning of martial law. And you can see that in the presses of the day.
I have no problem with the confidence in God.
You have no problem seeing it. Why would you even expect that to take place on planet Earth? This here is the only source that actually describes the crisis and the chaos at the end of the world. The Bible. And when the Bible talks about that crisis and that chaos, it includes with several witnesses that in that time period, the Lord lifts up an ensign to represent him in this crisis. You can see the crisis coming based upon his word. He has to put a voice for himself in place at that time because he never changes.
Can that voice still be put in place if July 18th doesn't happen?
You're putting an effort.
No, I'm saying honestly, if you believe this movement has had enough history now that you're that voice, can you be lifted up as an ensign if July 18th doesn't happen in the way we predicted it?
I really don't think you can. What was... Yes.
Can you even imagine? Nobody in the world could imagine this. Could you imagine that we got worldwide advertising for free and say God didn't do that advertising?
Advertising of what? The prediction of, of this message, the prediction of July 18th.
Doesn't answer my question. That's right.
I think it answers your question. It's just maybe you're not wanting to hear.
You know, one thing too, I don't read in great controversy where the Adventist nor William Miller entertained such thoughts.
Yeah, but you're not going to see, the argument to that is you're not going to see them discussing in advance the disappointment like we are.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's just, so if you're saying that it would be wrong to be discussing these things, I'm saying, okay, all right. Yeah, we're having a discussion that is for our history alone. And I don't have a problem with the discussion. But I'm telling you that the logic that we understand about the ensign demands that Elijah is identified as the true prophet. And what did Elijah do? Elijah walked up and said, okay, this is the test we're going to do. We're going to do this test. You do your sacrifice, I do my sacrifice. You go first, I'll go second. And the one that gets answered by fire from God proves the premise of who's representing God and who isn't representing God. So the whole premise of Elijah to come is an event that makes a distinction about who is God's mouthpiece in the crisis at the end of the world. And I'm saying July 18th fits those characteristics 100%.
In Prophets and Kings, page 121, 122, it says concerning Elijah and his message to Ahab and Israel, it was only by the exercise of strong faith in the unfailing power of God's word that Elijah delivered his message. Had he not possessed implicit confidence in the one whom he served, he would never have appeared before Ahab. On his way to Samaria, Elijah had passed by ever-flowing streams, hills covered with verdure, and stately forests that seemed beyond the reach of drought. Everything on which the eye rested was clothed with beauty. The prophet might have wondered how the streams that had never ceased their flow could become dry, or how those hills and valleys could be burned with drought. But he gave no place to unbelief. He fully believed that God would humble apostate Israel and that through judgments they would be brought to repentance. Gave no place to unbelief.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, the reality of us as human beings, we don't even know if we're going to be alive tomorrow. But as we consider the implications of next Sabbath, July 19th after next Sabbath, either way, no matter what happens, a traumatic event is going to hit your people. And we ask that this week would be a time when they draw close to you and that you draw close to us, that you might strengthen us in the beginning of our confidence, a confidence that we have recognized since you first called us to be Christians unto yourself, And since you first brought us into this message and this movement, that in spite of all the human imperfection that have been manifested in this movement through the years, that we would be able to see that your providential leading has been carried out every step of the way, that we might have confidence that we've actually reached the time period that all the prophets and righteous men long to live in, the time period of the midnight cry, when you lift up a people as your ensign in the final crisis of 6,000 years of sin. May we be worthy to be among that group, and we thank you for the time we spent studying your word this afternoon. In Jesus' name, amen.